Stuff to do with family overwhelms me quite a bit. You know, worry or stress around family side of things, that does overwhelm me quite a bit.
A midnight fire, classified royal documents reduced to ash, and the order to burn them came from somewhere very close to the throne. Let's find out what happened. The midnight burning. It started with smoke, not the kind you notice right away, not the kind that sets off alarms or brings people running. This was quiet smoke, deliberate smoke, the kind that rises slowly from a fireplace that someone has carefully, intentionally fed. It was late. Most of the household staff had already retired for the night. The corridors were dark. The residence was silent. But in one particular room, a fire was burning, and it was burning things it had no business burning. 3 members of staff were seen that night, not cleaning, not preparing for the following morning. They were carrying documents, stacks of them, folders, loose papers, bound correspondence, and one by one, those papers were going into the fire. This did not happen by accident. Nobody stumbles into a royal residence past midnight with armfuls of paperwork and decides on a whim to start a bonfire. This was organized, this was planned, and according to the sources who have since come forward, this had been ordered. The question that immediately follows is a simple one. Who gave the order? That question is what has turned a late-night incident into a full-blown crisis inside the British royal family. Because the answer, when it started to emerge, pointed in a direction that nobody inside the palace wanted to acknowledge, and the more people tried to avoid that direction, the more obvious it became that they already knew exactly where it led. Now, here is what we know. In late April of 2025, staff members at a royal residence connected to the senior household were observed in circumstances that multiple insiders have described as deeply irregular. The timing was not random. It did not coincide with any scheduled clearance or administrative review. There was no official record of a document disposal order being issued through proper channels, no memo, no authorization form, no supervising official logged as being present. In other words, whatever was burned that night was burned off the books. One source close to the household described the scene in terms that are difficult to forget. They said it felt like watching something being erased, not tidied away, not archived, erased. There is a difference, and every single person present that night understood exactly what that difference meant. But here is what made it worse. The staff members involved were not new. These were not temporary hires or junior employees making a reckless decision without understanding the consequences. These were experienced household staff, people who had worked inside the royal system long enough to know every rule, every protocol, every procedure that governs how sensitive documents are handled. They knew what they were doing was wrong. They did it anyway. And that tells you something critical about the level of pressure they must have been operating under. Because people who know the rules do not break them like this unless they feel they have no choice. Unless the instruction came from somewhere they could not refuse. Unless the person who told them to do it carried enough authority that saying no felt more dangerous than saying yes. Word travels fast inside royal households, even when people are trying to keep it slow. By the following morning, whispers were already moving through the staff corridors, not loud conversations, not open discussions. Quiet words exchanged in passing, a look between 2 people that said more than any sentence could. The atmosphere had shifted overnight, and everyone could feel it even if most of them did not yet know why. By midday, those whispers had begun moving upward, through layers of staff hierarchy, past personal assistants and private secretaries, into rooms where they were never supposed to arrive. And by that evening, the temperature inside the palace had changed entirely, because the whispers had reached someone with the authority to demand answers and the fury to make sure he got them. Someone who had spent years watching information being managed, contained, and selectively shared within an institution that had mastered the art of keeping its own people in the dark. Someone who was done being kept in the dark. That someone was William, and what happened next would push this family to the edge of something it may not be able to come back from. William finds out. There are people inside the royal household whose entire job is to make sure the Prince of Wales is never caught off guard. Advisors, private secretaries, communications staff, loyalty managers who operate so quietly, you would never know they existed. A carefully constructed layer of insulation between William and anything that might destabilize him or arrive before it has been properly shaped into something manageable. That layer failed completely. William did not hear about the midnight burning through official channels. He did not receive a carefully worded briefing or a diplomatic summary prepared by someone whose job it is to soften difficult information before it lands. He heard about it the way nobody in his position is ever supposed to hear about anything, through a conversation that was not meant to happen, from someone who had decided, for reasons of their own, that staying silent was no longer something they were willing to do. And when he heard it, his reaction was not measured. It was not the composed, considered response of a future king who has been trained since childhood to manage his emotions in public and in private. It was not careful. It was not diplomatic. By all accounts, William was furious in a way that people around him had rarely seen before. The word that multiple sources have used independently of each other, without coordination, is volcanic. One insider described the atmosphere in the room immediately after William was told as the kind of silence that only exists after something very loud has just happened. The air had changed. The people closest to him that day knew they were watching something shift inside him. Something that had been building for a long time and had finally found a reason to break through the surface. This was not the first time William had felt that something was being hidden from him. That context matters enormously. There had been other moments over the preceding months, smaller ones individually, but significant in their accumulation. Moments where information had seemed to arrive late or not arrive at all, where decisions appeared to have been made at senior household level without his knowledge, where the institutional machinery around him seemed to be moving in directions he had not authorized, had not been consulted on, and had only discovered after the fact. He had raised concerns before, quietly, through the appropriate channels, in the measured language that palace culture demands even when you are furious. And each time, those concerns had been absorbed, acknowledged, and then carefully dissolved into the general management of things without ever producing a real answer. But this was different. This was not a delayed briefing. This was not a miscommunication between offices. This was a fire. Actual documents, actually destroyed in the middle of the night, with no official record, no authorization, and no explanation. This was not something that could be absorbed and dissolved. This was something that demanded a direct response. William wanted answers. He wanted them immediately. He made it absolutely clear to the people around him that he expected a full account of what had happened, who had authorized it, who had been present, who had known in advance, and most critically, what exactly had been destroyed and why. Here is where it gets complicated, and this is the part of the story that moved everything from a serious incident into something approaching a genuine crisis, because the people William turned to for those answers were not able to give them. Not because they did not know. Several of them, it became increasingly clear, knew exactly what had happened. They had known before William found out. They had made a calculation, consciously or otherwise, that this was not information he needed to have, not yet. Perhaps not ever. When William understood that, when it became apparent that his own circle had been aware of something this significant and had chosen not to bring it to him, the fury that had already been considerable became something else entirely. It became a cold, determined, immovable demand for accountability that the people around him recognized immediately as a line being drawn. He stopped asking questions through the usual channels. He started asking them directly, bypassing the layers, going around the management, speaking to people he trusted rather than people he was supposed to trust. And the name that kept surfacing in every conversation, the name that everyone in his orbit had been carefully, deliberately, conspicuously avoiding, kept coming back to the same person, Camilla. But before we get to that confrontation, we need to understand what was actually in those documents, because without that piece, nothing else in this story makes complete sense. What was in those documents, nobody has officially confirmed what was destroyed that night. That is precisely the problem, and it is a problem that cuts in a very particular direction. Because when documents disappear without explanation, the absence of information becomes its own kind of information. The shape of what is missing tells you a great deal about why it was removed, and the length someone went to in order to remove it tells you even more about what it contained. Sources who have spoken about this have been careful, deliberately careful. The kind of careful that suggests they are acutely aware of exactly how serious this situation is and exactly how much personal risk they are carrying by saying anything at all. These are not people who speak loosely. These are not people chasing attention or angling for a moment in the spotlight. They are people who have spent years inside a system that punishes disclosure, and they are talking anyway. That alone should tell you something about the weight of what they are carrying, but careful people still talk. And what they have said, in fragments, in guarded language, in the kind of sentences that stop just short of the most damaging detail, paints a picture that is deeply uncomfortable for everyone at the top of this institution. The documents are believed to have included correspondence, private correspondence, not the kind that passes through official palace communication systems where records are kept and access is logged, not the kind that gets referenced in briefing notes or archived in any register that could later be consulted. This was private correspondence of the kind that exists precisely because it is off the official record. Letters, handwritten notes, written exchanges between individuals at the very highest levels of the royal household that were never intended to be seen by anyone outside an extremely small circle. Stop and think about what that means for a moment. There is official palace communication, and then there is the other kind. The kind that happens when people at that level want to say something they cannot say through any channel that leaves a trace. The existence of that kind of correspondence already tells a story. The decision to destroy it tells a much louder one. But the correspondence was not the only thing. There is also believed to have been financial material in what was burned that night. And again, not public accounts. Not anything that appears in an annual transparency report or gets submitted to any external body for review. Private financial records, the kind that relate to arrangements made quietly between parties, who had strong reasons for keeping those arrangements out of any official documentation. Decisions taken without public disclosure, transactions that were structured specifically to avoid the kind of scrutiny that public royal finances are, at least in theory, subject to. Now, hold those two things together. Private correspondence and private financial records, destroyed together. In the same fire, in the middle of the night, without authorization, without a paper trail, without any official notification to the people who should have been informed. That combination does not describe an administrative action. It does not describe a routine clearance or a scheduled disposal of outdated material. That combination describes the profile of a cover-up, a deliberate, coordinated effort to make certain information permanently inaccessible. The question of what specifically those documents contained is one that may never be fully answered. That is partly the point of burning them. Destruction is permanent in a way that concealment is not. You can find hidden things. You cannot find ash. But sources have pointed toward a particular period that comes up repeatedly in conversations about what may have been at stake. The years between 2010 and 2019 are mentioned consistently. Those were years of significant transition inside the royal family, years of shifting alliances and changing power structures, years during which the long-term future of the monarchy was being actively shaped by decisions made in private by a small number of very influential people. They were also years during which certain relationships within the family were under enormous strain, and certain individuals were working with considerable determination to consolidate influence in ways that were not visible to those outside the immediate inner circle. One source used a phrase that has stayed with everyone who has heard it. They said those documents were the kind of thing that could rewrite the official version of events, not change history in any grand public sense, rewrite the carefully maintained institutional version of it. The version the palace has been curating and protecting for years. That is an extraordinary claim. It would be easy to dismiss if it were not for one thing. The moment William started asking what had been destroyed, the same name kept appearing in every answer. The same person kept surfacing in every account of who had known, who had access, and who had the most to lose if those particular documents had ever been read by the wrong person. That name was Camilla. And the confrontation that followed was unlike anything this family has experienced in a very long time. Camilla. In the crosshairs. The relationship between William and Camilla has never been simple. Anyone who tells you otherwise is not paying attention. And anyone inside the palace who pretends it has been repaired, resolved, and put comfortably behind them is either deeply uninformed or deliberately misleading you. It goes back to the beginning. To the years before Diana died, when a young William understood in the way that children understand things, not through analysis but through instinct and feeling, and the particular clarity that comes from watching your mother in pain, that this woman was at the center of everything that was breaking his family apart. That understanding did not disappear when he grew older. It did not soften when his father remarried. It did not dissolve into diplomatic acceptance the way the palace communications team would have liked the world to believe. It went underground. It became something managed, something contained behind layers of protocol and public performance, something that was never spoken about directly, but was always present in every room they shared. For years, the public version of their relationship was one of cautious coexistence, William playing his role with the discipline his position demands, Camilla playing hers with the particular skill she has always shown for making herself appear less powerful than she is, both of them performing the unity that the institution required, smiling at the same events, standing in the same photographs, maintaining the surface with the kind of professional commitment that the monarchy depends on from its senior members. But the private version has always been more complicated, far more complicated. And in the weeks following the midnight burning, the private version became impossible to contain any longer. When William's questions about the burning began circling toward Camilla, this was not a desperate search for someone to blame. It was not grief or old resentment dressed up as investigation. It was the result of a specific sequence of information that had emerged through the internal conversations happening inside the palace. A trail. A clear, consistent, and deeply troubling trail of who had known what, when they had known it, and who had been in a position to give the kind of instruction that experienced household staff would feel compelled to follow without question. That trail led directly and consistently to her office. Multiple sources have confirmed that at least one of the staff members present during the burning was not simply connected to Camilla's household in some loose or peripheral sense. This was not a shared staff member who might have had occasional contact with her team. This was someone who reported directly into her office, someone who operated squarely within her sphere of influence, someone whose professional existence inside the palace was entirely dependent on her patronage and her approval, and someone who, by every account of how royal household hierarchies actually function, would not have taken an action of this magnitude without some form of sanction from above. When that connection was established clearly enough that it could no longer be explained away or reframed as coincidence, William moved. He did not wait for a consensus to form. He did not seek the measured institutional response that palace culture typically demands before any action is taken against a senior figure. He went directly to the people overseeing palace operations and made a demand that everyone present described in the same terms: non-negotiable. He wanted Camilla investigated, formally, officially, with a full and transparent accounting of her involvement, her prior knowledge, and the role of every individual connected to her household in the events of that night and the days surrounding it. That demand landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples it created moved through every level of the institution immediately, because what William was asking for had no clean precedent in the modern history of this family. You do not simply investigate the queen consort. You do not open a formal inquiry into the wife of the reigning monarch, a woman who carries the second highest title in the land, without consequences that extend far beyond the original question and touch every part of the institution simultaneously. The political implications alone were staggering. The constitutional dimensions were uncomfortable. And the personal dimensions, the reality of what it would mean for Charles to have his wife under formal investigation at the demand of his son, were almost too painful for the advisors in that room to fully process. But William was not asking. He was insisting. And behind closed doors, the confrontation between his position and the forces aligned with Camilla became the most intense and most dangerous internal conflict this family had experienced in decades. Some of the people present during those conversations have privately described it as the most frightening atmosphere they had ever encountered inside the palace walls. The last time things felt this broken, this uncontainable, this genuinely threatening to the stability of the institution itself, was somewhere in the middle of the 1990s, and everyone old enough to remember what happened then understood exactly what that comparison meant. The investigation begins. By early May of 2025, something was moving inside the palace. You could not see it from the outside. There was no press release, no official statement, No carefully managed public announcement designed to get ahead of a story before it became uncontrollable. From the outside, everything looked exactly as it always does. Scheduled engagements, coordinated appearances, the smooth, polished surface of an institution that has spent centuries perfecting the art of looking composed while everything underneath is on fire. But underneath, something was definitely moving. Senior palace officials had begun asking questions, not publicly, not through any process that would generate documentation visible to the outside world or trigger any kind of parliamentary notification. Behind closed doors, in private meetings held in rooms where phones were not present and notes were taken by hand rather than typed into any system that could later be accessed or reviewed. With the kind of deliberate, careful methodology that suggests someone in a position of authority had decided that a record needed to exist, even if that record was never intended to be seen by anyone outside an extremely small group of people. The staff members who had been present during the midnight burning, along with others who had knowledge of the surrounding circumstances, were called in individually for conversations. The language used to request their presence was carefully chosen. They were not summoned. They were not formally ordered to appear. They were invited. Asked if they might have a few minutes for a quiet conversation with a senior advisor. The softness of the language was deliberate, but every single person who received that invitation understood with complete clarity what it actually meant. This was not a casual discussion. This was not a welfare check or a routine staff review. This was an accounting. And the people walking into those rooms were walking in knowing that what they said and what they chose not to say would have consequences. The conversations were conducted by individuals whose loyalty to the crown was beyond question. Not outside investigators, not legal professionals brought in from outside the institution, senior advisors, long-serving palace figures who had spent decades inside the system and understood every dimension of what was at stake. People who knew how to ask questions in a way that extracted maximum information while leaving the person being questioned, feeling, at least temporarily, that they were in a safe and contained environment. But the questions themselves were investigators' questions, precise, sequential, building on each other in ways that made it very difficult to give an incomplete answer without the incompleteness becoming immediately apparent. Who authorized the burning? Who was present from beginning to end? Who had prior knowledge before that night? Who had communicated with whom in the 48 hours leading up to it? Who had been given instructions, and by what means those instructions had been delivered? Those questions, asked carefully enough and of enough people in sequence, were beginning to produce answers, and the answers were not clean. At least one member of staff had already been removed from their position before these conversations even formally began. Not dismissed, not let go in any way that would generate a record or attract attention. Transferred. Quietly and efficiently moved to a role in a completely different part of the household. A role with significantly reduced access to sensitive information. A role that placed them at a considerable distance from the central figures in this story, and from any ongoing operations that might be relevant to what was being investigated. That kind of move carries meaning. It always does inside this institution. When the palace transfers someone in the manner that person was transferred, under those particular circumstances and at that particular speed, it is not a neutral administrative action. It is an acknowledgement. It confirms that there is something that needs to be managed. You do not quietly reassign an innocent person with that level of urgency. The reassignment itself, the speed and the silence surrounding it, is a form of admission that something happened and that the person being moved was close enough to it to be a liability. But here is what the conversations were beginning to reveal that went far beyond any single staff member. The picture that was emerging was not the picture of an action. It was not the profile of a small group of frightened employees making a desperate and unauthorized decision on their own initiative in the middle of the night. It was the picture of something coordinated, something discussed in advance, something where multiple people across different levels of the household had played specific and knowing roles in an action designed with one clear purpose: to make certain information permanently and irretrievably inaccessible. That finding changed everything about the nature and the urgency of what was happening. Because a coordinated destruction of sensitive documents is not a staff matter, it cannot be resolved with a firm internal memo and a quiet reassignment. It carries legal dimensions that the palace's own advisors were now being forced to confront directly. It raises questions about obstruction, about the deliberate interference with records that, depending on their nature and their origin, may have carried protections that made their destruction not simply improper, but potentially unlawful. William understood every dimension of this. His demand for a full investigation had not softened. As the complexity of the situation became clearer, it had hardened. And the people who had hoped that his initial fury would cool into something more manageable were discovering that they had fundamentally misread the man they were dealing with. The crown under pressure. Everything that is happening right now is happening against a backdrop that makes it more dangerous, more volatile, and more consequential than it would be at almost any other moment in the recent history of this family. And to understand why this particular crisis carries the weight that it does, you have to understand the environment in which it is unfolding. The king is not well. That is not speculation. That is not a tabloid claim built on anonymous whispers and creative interpretation. It is a fact that has been reported, carefully acknowledged in public, and dealt with in far more urgent and sobering terms in private. Charles is fighting. Nobody who knows him doubts his determination or his commitment to the role he has waited his entire life to fulfill. But the reality of his health situation means that the question of transition, of what comes after, of who holds influence and how that influence is structured, is not a distant hypothetical that can be set aside for another day. It is a present, active, and pressing consideration inside the palace right now. In that context, a war between William and Camilla is not a family disagreement that can be managed with a carefully arranged lunch and a firm word from a senior advisor. It is a succession crisis unfolding in real time. Because the person who manages access to the king at this moment in his life, the person who controls what information reaches him and in what form, the person who shapes his understanding of what is happening inside his own household, holds a level of power that goes far beyond any official title or formal role. And that person, in the current structure of the household, is Camilla. William knows this. The people around William know this. And the documents that were burned, whatever they contained, were connected directly to this question of power. Who holds it, how it was accumulated, and what it would mean for certain people if the full picture of how it had been exercised over the preceding years were ever to become known. There is a version of this story in which the burning was a defensive action, someone protecting themselves or protecting someone they were loyal to from information that could be used against them at the worst possible moment. There is another version in which it was something more calculated than that, an offensive move, a deliberate effort to remove leverage that someone else held, to take away a weapon before it could be deployed, to ensure that a particular conversation could never happen because the evidence that would have made it unavoidable no longer existed. Both versions lead to the same place, a palace in which the most senior people are not working toward the same purpose, a family in which trust has collapsed so completely that someone concluded the only available option was to destroy evidence in the middle of the night, and a future king who is now openly, actively, and with total determination, pushing for accountability inside an institution that has protected itself for generations by ensuring that real accountability never actually arrives. The staff members directly involved are not speaking publicly. The palace has issued no statement about the events of that night or the investigation that has followed. Camilla's representatives have maintained complete silence. No denial, no clarification, no expression of concern or cooperation. Just silence. And as anyone who has watched this family closely understands, silence from Buckingham Palace is never the absence of a response. It is a response. It is the most carefully chosen response available to people who understand that anything they say can only make their position worse. Charles, by all accounts, is being kept at a measured distance from the full picture of what has been uncovered. Whether that is a kindness or a strategy depends entirely on who is doing the managing. But the investigation is continuing. The questions are not stopping. William is not stepping back. And the people who believed that burning those documents would make the problem disappear are learning something that power has always struggled to accept. Fire does not destroy the truth. It only changes the form the truth takes when it finally surfaces. And inside the palace right now, the truth is very close to the surface indeed. The documents are ash. But the questions are alive. When the most powerful family in Britain turns on itself behind closed doors, the truth refuses to stay buried. William is not finished. This investigation is not finished. And whatever was in that fire is still very much in this story.